I'm bringing you dinner. I'll be there in a little bit. But kind of backtrack a couple weeks, found out my wife was going to be induced this week. I told Bonner, I said, hey, about that talk. I can't do that. I gotta step down. You know, my family needs me. He sees my wife out at lunch and knocks and convinces her to let me come up here today, that I'm not needed at home. I'm just going to be a piece of furniture. You know, she can handle it, all this and that. So I said, you at least got to buy me dinner, man. So anyway, we're going to get on with this. We're going to talk a little bit about diversifying your corn. I'm a corn grower. Soybeans, she talked about growing soybeans. I don't see why you'd do that. I'm all about corn. So I think one of the Harrell brothers is going to talk about soybeans later. We grow soybeans too, just they're boring. So we're going to start out with performance, 542. Does anybody know what the significance of 542 is? That's the current world record on bushels per acre of corn, 542 bushels per acre. How many of you guys are growing corn like that? I'm sure not, but I'm trying to. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do to try to get to that number, or maybe it's 300, maybe it's 250. And you might say, well, David Hula, he's got all this fantastic dirt. Well, this is a quote from him. He says, we don't have a magic piece of dirt. We're farming fine, sandy loam soils. So you get up here north of the river, you guys got tremendous soil. I've got junk down in Stark County. So if anybody's going to do it, it's probably a bunch of you guys. So what's missing out there to get to that 542? I think the number one thing, or any performance, is hybrid. Placement's key. Whether it's going for high-end yields on your best piece of dirt, going to the back 40 that might be some high sand that maybe shouldn't even be farmed, you're just trying to get 120 bushels an acre. Hybrid is probably the number one thing. You need to have that placement right. You know, talk to these guys like Bonner and Matt and your salesmen. They're going to help you out a lot in that placement. Maybe some micronutrients are missing. Zinc is a big micro early on for corn. On our farm, we found out that manganese is something that we put in with the pop-up fertilizer. It's big. And sulfur is getting bigger every year, it seems like. There's a lot of research on that. 20 years ago, we got a great sulfur coming from the region up here on the iron mills and NIPSCO, but now they cleaned all that up so we don't get sulfur from the rain anymore. And I like to call them auxiliary fertilizers. Maybe this is something to play with. Sugar to feed the microbes in the soil to help get more nutrients released. Carbon, humic, fulvic acids, plant growth regulators. You probably heard some of these, maybe you use them. Some of those can come up with great results. Here's a picture I came across on my phone. I sent that to my brother right when I did it. I had a trial. It's called Wex. It's from Conklin Products. And they're not even too sure how it works. It came out, I think, in the 60s. But right there on my yield map, you can see a color change, and that's pretty significant. I think it was 12 bushel difference just by putting 1 quart of Wex on when we sprayed our pre-emerge herbicide. So that's definitely something I'm going to look at closer. Some other things to try, and some of these might not even cost money. So finding that right hybrid is key. You know, a lot of guys might say, hey, give me a hybrid or 2 to try out this year that are new. You know, instead of 2, go to Matt and say, give me 5 to try. You know, place those out. You might find that right hybrid that works perfect on your farm. I'm a crazy hybrid guy. I'm going to have like 35 different corn hybrids this year on my farm. It takes a lot of time in the spring, but it's pretty cool watching them all grow. Mechanical changes. Maybe you're a no-till guy, haven't tilled for a while. Maybe you're a tillage guy that never tried no-till. Maybe give that a shot. Split a field in half, see what happens. Down pressure on your planter. Maybe you've got springs, airbags. I don't know, maybe the spring's been set in notch 2 for 10 years because that's what you think's best. Maybe things have changed over time. Try a different setting. You know, these are easy things to try. Maybe a new treatment. This is what I always do. I get that Bex. I don't want to say Bex too many times here, but the Practical Farm Research Study book, it comes out. Go through that book, find a few different things to try. You know, they're doing it on little amounts of acres, but it gives you a picture maybe to try on 10 or 20 acres on your farm. And I found quite a few products that work pretty good by looking at that and trying on my own farm. And ask your neighbors, guys. This is not a big secret. I know a lot of guys are a little bit secret, like, oh, I don't want to tell the neighbor. You can ask me anything. I'll probably tell you what I'm doing. So how do we know if what we're doing is going to work? You got to see it to believe it, right? So if you're doing some micros, you want to try micros, you look at your soil sampling. Maybe you don't have any sulfur in your soil. That's the first place to try. Tissue sampling is something that is becoming more prevalent, probably pretty important. We can catch some of these ideas before the plant even shows it by getting out there and getting a tissue sample. Scouting obviously is big. I spent a lot of my summer walking fields, mainly fixing irrigation, so I have to walk the fields. But we get out there, get a good look at it. From emergence, that's the number one thing. You can get imagery, satellite imagery from a lot of companies nowadays, whether it's somebody flying a drone or from a satellite. And in the end, the yield trial, that's what matters in the end. Make sure you have a good yield monitor working and calibrated. If you don't, I'm sure Bonner will bring the way wagon out there for you and get those trials figured out. So this is probably my favorite area of protection. So we've got another number here, 800, 850. Where'd my David Hula fan go? So 800, 850. This is what David Hula, the record-growing corn crop guy, thinks the potential of corn actually is. So when that seed is in the bag, it has 800 to 850 bushel an acre potential. We just have to protect that potential. So here's a quote from another one of my favorite guys. He's another record-growing, didn't beat David yet, but he might. Randy Dowdy, he's got a lot of great ideas, doing a lot of great things with corn and soybeans. And he says the key to high yields is to minimize stress on the corn plant. I mean, there's no secret. That's what it's about. So obviously weather is the number one thing that we have to worry about stressing our corn plant. So some simple things we can do to mitigate that weather issue and protect our corn crop better is distance. Maybe your farm's just a couple miles away from home base and you get a big hail event, a big rain event, and that's going to affect your whole corn crop. Well, think about maybe going 10 miles down the road, north, south, east, or west, and you get a big hail event, a wind event. Maybe some of your corn missed out on that, and you'll have a better crop that way. And when you do that, typically you find different soils. In Stark County, where I farm, most of our ground, we have a lot of muck and sand. So a year like this year, we had, I don't know where Purdue got their data about rain every month. We had no rain all of June and July and half of August this year. So we had a lot of sand dry up. That's where these beautiful ears of corn came from. But the muck was tremendous. 2015, the muck didn't even have a stalk of corn left on it by the time it got done raining. But the sand had a fighting chance because it finally had enough moisture in 15. So if you diversify those soils, then you protect your corn crop a little bit better. And there's some obvious things, drainage, keep those ditches in shape, get the tile out there, make sure they work. And irrigation, I'm big on irrigation. We have a lot of lighter soils. Up here you got some better soils, and I'd see the Wyckoff farm, they're big on irrigation. Protect that corn plant, especially get out there with the seed corn. It's a lot higher value crop. And think outside of the box here a little bit. Irrigation is not just for water. And it might come back to performance also, but you can chemigate with that center pivot or drip tape or whatever you're using. Run fungicide through that. Fertigation, get some of those fertilizers out there. Nitrogen late. I'm doing some experimenting this summer with foliar feeding through a center pivot. If you run it fast enough and nozzle it down enough, you can do that. And cooling, that maybe comes back more on soybeans, but sometimes we get a length of hot nights on corn. It needs to respirate. Run that pivot across there fast, get that field cooled down, and it might gain a couple bushels each night. I love pictures. They tell 1,000 words, I guess. So this picture on the left is actually from 2015 on a muck farm, and it sat like this. I think I got it pumped down and dried out 3 different times in June in 2015, and in the end we had no corn left. But the next year we put a bigger ditch pump in there, so we're ready for next time. I'm the man of the hail. I've had 3 consecutive years of over a $10,000 hail claim. I think I'm the only guy in Indiana to do that. This was some hail from 2017, and I spoke here last year. I think I showed you some pictures of soybeans that got hailed on, but this was down the road, a different hail event. And those are typically just small events where you can spread out. And then the bottom picture, I was out walking a field and came across what I think is a lightning strike. It fried the corn about 20-foot circle out there, and I haven't figured out how to protect against that yet. This is one of my favorite pictures. A little bit hard to see up there, but this is a center pivot. This actually came from Apple Maps. I came across. I look at Apple and Google Maps all the time looking for cool pictures. And if you can see, this side of the center pivot is dark green. This side looks like it's completely drying up, but if you notice in the corner where the pivot actually doesn't hit, it's even browner. This is from 2016. We were drier at our farm in 2016 and 2018 than we were in 2012. It was just a little bit cooler those 2 years. But we were running the center pivot around putting on as much water as we could, as fast as we could, and the corn was completely drying up in between waterings. But it shows how much irrigation can help in a field. And my favorite thing to talk about is corn hybrids and genetic diversity. It's a really simple way to protect your corn crop, is to diversify your genetics. Depending on who you talk to or listen to, there's 50 or 60 plus corn breeders out there. I'm talking universities, some independent guys, and there's about 6 major players in the market. The question is, how many baskets do you put in your eggs in when it comes to your corn crop? You know, if you're going to a company like DeKalb and just buying DeKalb, you're probably getting everything from one breeding program. You know, same thing if you go to NK or Golden Harvest. I don't want to sound like a Wyckoff commercial. I wasn't here for that, but I like getting a lot of my corn from these guys because Matt's accessing genetics from pretty much every program out there because he's not tied to a Monsanto or tied to a Syngenta or tied to a Dow Dupe. I don't even know the names anymore. They change so much. But so think about that when you talk to Bon or Matt or Doug or whoever your salesman is. You know, make sure you're getting something from different backgrounds that aren't related so closely that if we have a outbreak of tar spot, it doesn't hit your whole corn crop. So these 3 sets of ears, there's 3 different hybrids, came from one farm, 140-acre farm I had this year. And you can see right there the huge difference between the genetics on this farm. And we'll go back to that picture here in a second. And this also happened on that farm. This is apparently Bonner's favorite thing in the world, this bacterial stock rot. And it's so rare that I've had probably 10 plus agronomists tell me I couldn't possibly have had that. Some of them have never heard of it. Like, how can you be an agronomist never heard of a disease that you can get in Indiana? But so this is a bacteria that infects the corn plant in one way by getting infected water down in the whorl of the plant. So there's 3 ways that can happen. A flooding event when your corn's short, where the ditches actually come out of the banks and flood your corn. Or the corn can be a little bit taller, the flood water doesn't get over the whorl, but rain can splash it up into the whorl. And the third way, I was out here protecting my crop and looking for great performance by irrigating it with water from a ditch, and I killed it. I was pretty upset. This is one of my best looking corn crops I've had in a long time. And on a Tuesday, I go out there, everything looks great. On a Thursday, I see a stalk dying. I'm like, yeah, you know, probably who knows what got to it. Fast forward a week, I've got 15 to 20% of the one hybrid along the ditch banks that was looking like that, dying during the grain fill stage. So whatever plants got affected at this point was essentially no yield. Well, the good thing on that farm, I had these 3 hybrids out there. One of them died 15 to 20%. One of them got it about 5%. And the third hybrid wasn't affected at all by this disease. You can go exactly where the center pivots missed. We did not have any of it. I had the worst hybrid that got it on this farm on a farm irrigated by well water. It didn't have it, so we knew it came from the ditch for sure. So the funny thing is, the ears in the bottom that appear to look the best, they got tar spot the worst, even though they didn't get the bacterial stock rot, and they were the worst yielding in the end. So there was no weight on the kernels by the end of the year. So here's a few more pictures I really like. This one on the left is October 1st. And if you planted your whole farm or half your farm or 20% of your farm to this, and you walked out October 1st and saw those ears on the ground, you'd probably be pretty upset. Luckily, I only had, I think, about 200 acres of that corn. It's pretty upsetting. And you're thinking, oh, you should have planted traded corn. This was traded corn. It wasn't from bugs chewing on the ear shank. It's just a genetic issue, I'll call it, with that hybrid, that the shanks are terrible, and under certain stress conditions, which could have been tar spot, it decided to drop its ears. So the other side, this is October 11th. This is on the same farm, pass to pass. That top corn, you can tell it was lodged 40 to 50%. This is October 11th. It's not December 11th. There's no excuse for that in my mind. The bottom picture was standing 99%, and it was a different hybrid. I had to go half speed in the top one to try to get 90% of the corn, and I couldn't get 100%. The top one was an LG corn. The bottom one was Wyckoff 2669. That side was a Beck's corn, just letting everybody know. So here's another, this was a neighbor that called me, wanted me to like, hey, what do you think's going on here? This was a Acre Max corn. I'll quit dropping Beck's name. I I don't know why. It should have been protected from the western bean cutworm and all the other bugs, but the genetics of the corn apparently decided not to express that trait in this field. It was about 90% of the years this field looked like that. This was an irrigated farm, and this field went about 155 bushel an acre on some pretty decent irrigated dirt, because this is what every single ear looked like in that field for whatever reason. So had he planted half that field to a different genetics, different hybrid, he would have been a lot better off. So the last section we're going to talk about is profitability. I got a number up here that 5,000, and it's, I guess, a challenge, and it's a challenge I give myself every year. If you have 1,000 acres of corn on your farm this year, figure out a way to be $5 an acre more efficient. You're going to bring $5,000 to the bank. So this is Peggy Whitson. She's a record-holding NASA astronaut, and she grew up on a farm out in Iowa, and she says, my work ethic is, I think, from my farm life, which if you farm, you know you got to have work ethic, because there's certain times of the season where you just have to go. I mean, that's how you can become a lot more efficient and profitable, is work ethic. So when we talk about profitability, you got to become more efficient. Think about when you're out there planting, and on soils up this way, more so than most of my soils, I can go plant corn after 2 inches of rain. You got that optimum window. You know, maybe it's April 22nd, and you have about 8 days to get your corn crop in, and then it rains, and you can't get on your field, and it rains again, and before you know it, it's June. Well, if you think on your farm, maybe you're running a 12-row planter. What if you had a 16? You could have got 400, 500 more acres of that corn in that window, and now you're in June, and it's 40 bushel less crop. Could have, you know, paid for a planter in 1 year. Planting dates, too, kind of on the same boat. We all know the later you get into late May into June, your corn crop's yield is going down. It's just, you know, pretty much proven, except for 2012. Maybe that was goofy. Same thing at harvest time. You're out there in the fall, and harvest drags on. What can you do to speed that up? Maybe it's an auger cart. Maybe it's a bigger corn head. Maybe it's just simple as, you know, setting a schedule to run that combine for 1 more hour each day you can go. And it's something I found out a lot of guys talking to them don't know or don't understand this effect in the corn crop. You know, everybody's like, I want my corn to dry down to 17, 16, 15% because I don't want to take the dock. I don't want to pay for gas in the corn dryer. And this is a study. It's proven. If you don't believe me, you can try it on your own farm. But it's kernel dry down weight loss. When the ear stands on the corn plant and it dries down naturally, for some reason it loses weight. Not just moisture weight, but also dry weight. For every 1% the corn kernels dry down past 25%, you lose nearly 1% of your yield. So you're taking your 200 bushel corn crop, letting it dry down 15% to get rid of that dock or to not have to pay for gas, you're losing 20 bushels an acre, basically. So sounds crazy. Take a field, pick half of it off September 15th or October 1st, leave the rest to your last, and do some yield trials. You know, that's not counting losses from deer, turkeys, whatever else eats it, blowing down. That's just kernel dry weight loss. So, you know, depending on what your drying costs are or your harvest window, maybe, you know, you got to look at it in your own farm. You know, I'm not sitting here saying this, you have to do this. It's something to think about, to look at. So you got to get that drying charge, dock charge versus yield. Nitrogen is one place I think a lot of guys can become more efficient. We sat up here last year and listened to Bob Nielsen talk about nitrogen, and he's got it all wrong. But you got to think about the 4 R's: the right product, the right rate, the right time, and the right place. I'm not going to talk about product because, I mean, that kind of fits guys' farms, whether you're using 28 or anhydrous. But the right rate, you got to think about mineralization. You might have one farm down the road that's 1% organic matter. You go 3 miles that way and you run into 5% organic matter. That organic matter is going to release a lot of nitrogen on its own, so you sure don't want to put on the same amount of nitrogen on both farms. You're just going to waste money. Then you got to look at the pounds per bushel rate. You know, how many pounds of nitrogen do I put on for expected bushel? Bob was telling us last year 1.1, 1.2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. That's crazy. I'm using 0.8 on my farm, and it works. A lot of these guys in the National Corn Growers Association record yields are using 0.85 to 0.9. So if they're getting 400 to 500 bushel an acre and using 0.8 to 0.9 pounds of nitrogen per bushel, my goodness, we can get our farm average or 5 bushel better than our farm average by using a lot less nitrogen. And obviously, if corn's worth more, maybe you're going to run a little bit higher rate on the return rate. And think about the right time. Crop usage is not before you plant. when some guys put nitrogen on. It's not when some guys side dress when it's V4, V6. It's July, August when it uses most of the nitrogen. So try to get that nitrogen on later in the year. There's different ways to do that and try to minimize that leaching. Another thing to think about is where you're putting that nitrogen in the right place. Are you putting it 15 inches away from the main root mass of the corn plant, right in the middle of the row? Maybe you're broadcasting it across the whole field. Maybe you're putting it right on top of the root ball. So something to think about there. And the last thing we'll talk about in profitability is suppliers. Through a few different ways, I found out there's crazy price difference out there from suppliers. If you're going to your local co-op and just saying, give me this, give me that, like I do every year, and not price checking, I really strongly challenge you to go out there and get prices from a few different guys. And I think Brian Odom would be happy to give you a price on some supplies for chemicals and fertilizer. And there's generics out there. You don't have to use the brand name. Find it with, you can get the same product, the same active ingredient, the same percentage, and a lot of times save a lot of money. And I understand service does have value if you need, a truck to come out and tend to you, or need a guy driving a water tank. But look into that. How much would it cost you to, buy your own equipment to service yourself versus how much you're paying for that service? And the last thing is bulk fertilizer. These guys at the co-op or whatever, CFS, they're taking a semi, driving to the port, driving to the rail yard, hauling it back, dumping it out, loading it back up to haul it to you. You can take all that, take the middleman out. Potash, you can pile it up in the field, load it with a loader tractor, and spread it on your own. So something to look at. So in the end, I had to put a great picture up here. I had this guy just show up to our field and start taking pictures this year, and I got a bunch of them. I thought that was probably my favorite picture. So the more performance you have out there, the more you protect your crop, the more profitable you are, the more fun you get to have in the fall when you harvest, because that's what it's about right there to me, is harvesting that corn crop. So if there's any questions or comments, I'll take some. Otherwise, thanks for having me. All right.
I don't think we know that much detail. I am Ryan Deckard. I'm from down in the Brookston area. A little bit of background. I grew up farming down there, took about a 12-year break, working as an engineer in product design and development. So when I came back to the farm, I like to play around and test things. And it seemed like, to me, everybody was doing stuff on corn, but there wasn't a lot going on beans. So that's kind of where I do a lot of my playing around on different things. I play in corn too, but I've focused more on what can I try in beans to get bean yields to increase. Okay, which button do I need? There we go. So, like I said, I'm from Brookston, which we're straight down 421. Where we're at down there, I'm about 2.5 miles, 2 to 8 miles west of 421, and we run about 7 to 14 south of US 24. Our soils are a lot different than what Eric was talking about. We have a total of 2.5 acres of muck and about 10 of sand on the whole farm. Most of the rest of it, we're silt loam, silty clay loam soil types. Most of our organic matter is between 2.5 and 3.5, and most of our CECs run 13 to 17. So we've got some pretty good flat black dirt. Our issue isn't getting water on it, it's getting rid of it more so than getting it to it. In reality for us, irrigation isn't much of an option because we don't have enough water supply to run a pivot at any kind of a regular basis. Okay. Kind of a setup for what we're doing, or equipment I'm using on beans for last year, which is what all these results are from. We've got a Deere 1780 vac planter. It was 15-inch, 31 row. I do not run the Deere 108 cell seed disc. We run a 56 cell. It's actually an edible bean disc that has the same size holes in it. I run low enough populations on 15-inch rows that the motors were actually surging with 108 cells, and you could watch them jump because of the populations I was at. It is set up to run hydraulic rate, variable drive. We've got 8-section clutches put on it. We run pneumatic downforce only control, and we run all that being controlled by 2020. I basically built the planter cheap, buying all the neighbors' used up corn equipment when they all thought they had to go Delta Force and electric drive. I bought used parts to build the soybean planter with. I map everything pretty much in climate field view as we're going. Do run no-till colders on the planter as well. We really aren't no-till. This kind of gets into our standard practices. Typically, the prior fall, we'll do our dry fertilizer applications, P and K, lime if soil tests call for it, and when the weather permits, all the corn stalks get disked in the fall. Last year, that was 100 acres out of everything because it started raining and didn't quit. Typically in the spring for herbicide, we run a pre of Intimidator, which is a nutrient leveling product, along with 5 gallon of ATS per acre across all of our soybean acres. Seedbed prep, we do vertical tillage with the Salford 1200 series. Just about every single acre of soybean that goes in is treated with fungicide, insecticide, and an inoculant. They are not all the same because the seeds come from some different brands, so they're using different products, but everything has at least that level of treatment on it, kind of as the base setup. Like I mentioned, we were using Climate Field View. Everything gets backed up into AgLeader SMS. I also use SMS to create all of our prescriptions. I've been doing that since back in about 2006. So I've just stuck with that instead of switching to the Field View version. And I use both of them for different data analysis. There's some quick, easy things that are great in Field View. There's some more detailed things that are better to do running out of SMS. So I use a combination of both. One of the big things I've been playing with is soybean population for about the last 5 years, trying to figure out where we need to be. Kind of starting with how low is too low, how high is too high, and kind of what is the optimum to get the best ROI. Not necessarily completely just maximizing yield, but what makes us the most money per acre seeding rate versus final yield. And the next part kind of comes as a joke from some of us. We have a group, agronomist that comes in twice a year down where we're from that we work with. And we joke with them when we ask the question before we let them answer. Somebody in the group pretty much chimes in with an answer he's going to give is, it depends. That's kind of the standard agronomist. You ask him a question, he's always going to answer with that part first at least once a day. For population, for the trials, I basically create variable rate prescriptions for all the fields. Last year, the base numbers that were in the prescriptions, they were either 80,000, 100, 120, or 140. For the trials, I basically turn the prescription off and run a manual, set it at a flat rate, and at least make one round, if not a round and a half, so I've either got 80 or 120 foot strip for my trial. So last year I had trials out at 40,000, 50, 60, 70, 80, and then I did higher rate trials on one of our fields that I call, it's our rougher one that has the sand ridge through it. So I wanted to get lower and higher trials going across that sand ridge to try and fine tune where I wanted to be there. Our average population for soybeans last year, when it was all said and done, was 91,400 seeding rate average across the whole farm. Most seed guys don't like me when I show that number. This is layout of a couple of fields. I got different pictures coming out of the as planted, so you can see the different strips that are in that field where I shut off the population and I leave a gap of the prescription in between. So with that, I can go in and create areas of interest and compare the prescription to the flat rate, or I can look at just whole field averages versus the different rates to compare and contrast things a lot of different ways to try and figure out how things are working. This is another field that had a prescription in it. I only did the one strip on the one side because on the other side of the field we had some other trials going on, so that limited what I could work with in that field. This is another field where I did longer skinny field. This is the field where I had the 40,000 population trial in. And basically every field of soybeans I planted had a block somewhere in it of some kind of population trial, typically below 80,000. With the exception of the one field where I went up, everywhere else, anything I was trying, I was going down. This was the one, this is actually in the back right behind my house because I wanted to be able to keep more of an eye on the 40,000 to see how it did throughout the year. Also let me take some pictures. Went out August 15th with the drone and flew basically the split line, both sides of it, and took some pictures. Then later in the afternoon, I flew the drone in the morning, later in the afternoon went out and just walked out in the middle of the 40,000, grabbed one random plant and pulled it out and took it back in the shop and basically took a couple pictures first and then dismantled it in the shop, counting nodes, branches, and pods. And that just the one random plant had 10 single pods on it, 40 doubles, 140 triple pods, and 14 four-bean pods on that plant at that time. Like I said, I just walked out, bent down. I knew I was in the 40,000, grabbed it and left because at that point, even at 40,000, unless you were walking, this strip here is where one of the sprayer tracks is. Unless you were in that strip, you still couldn't walk through the 40,000 population beans. And this bean that is in this field is actually one of the Wyckoff numbers that we used. So kind of the summary of some of what I tried. After I got done looking at all the yields, I think I broke things on the bottom end at 40,000. It was not a disaster, but it was too low for my comfort. And really even the 40 and 60,000 trials, you really got to know your fields and where your zones need to switch to make those work. If you get too low in the wrong area, you really see numbers die really quick. 70 to 80,000 would seem to be the sweet spot on our best ground. You can take especially the 80 into a little bit of the rougher area and it does not fall apart on us. A lot of the areas where I'd planted 100 and 120,000 last year was too thick. And the too thick comment doesn't completely show up from the yield data, but it comes from the fact I was also driving the combine, watching when I was transitioning, and you could tell to the line, 80,000 would be standing up, the 100 would be laying down right just when you crossed the line, they were lodging. So the yield wasn't changing, but they weren't standing as good. So that means to me, I'm putting out seed that I don't need. The one thing we did learn, kind of the 120, 140, we need that to go over our sand ridges. Needed to get the plants taller, otherwise the bottom node, sometimes two, go under the cutter bars, you go over the sand ridge. So we do still have the need for some higher levels, but not on a wide scale basis. And this is a really confusing spreadsheet chart I put together, pulling the data out of climate. Basically, I have 10,000 population breaks centered around basically below 45 and then centered at 50, 60, 70, up to over 135. So what I did is I went through, across the top, I've got each of the fields. I put in their planting date, the average population for that field, the maturity of the bean that was in the field, and then figured out how that field averaged in comparison to the whole farm average. And one thing to note, the two that have the biggest negative numbers did not receive an R3 fungicide, insecticide, and growth regulator application. We were caught one of the really ugly June rains where we were basically saturated for 14 days straight, and we had some areas that had massive Phytophthora damage. So we kind of decided on two of the fields that had a lot of the damage that we don't want to go spend another $20 on fungicide when we had that kind of damage. The one field we completely skipped. The one all the way to the far right on the chart, we decided because they were spraying an adjacent field, had the co-op go in, make one round, 240 foot with that product just to see would it still respond. It turned out, well, I'll show that a little later, we should have sprayed the whole field, but we learned. But the color coding on here, is kind of done to highlight some areas. So I tried the orange, for the most part, shows the largest deficit below the field average for a population group. The one that doesn't fit is where you get the over 135, where I've got the red. That was the first field we planted. We had some planter setup issues and we had to do some replant, so we wound up doubling up. So I kind of ignored that section of 2 acres that had 21 below field average because it was a mechanical issue not related to the population of what we were trying to do. The green is where we had the biggest advantage over the field average. The blue basically corresponds to the largest number of acres in that field within the population category. And the yellow is really the one that is where I've got the most potential to pick up more bushels out of the whole field by multiplying how many bushels I was deficient by the number of acres they covered. So I know this chart gets real busy looking at all of it, especially probably from a distance. But kind of my takeaway when I got done with it, my feeling was I didn't do too bad on 7 of my 8 prescriptions. The field to the right, I could have done a lot better because I was 3 bushel below field average on 33.3 acres in that field. So there's 100 bushel on a 104 acre field that I have potential to pick up by getting the prescriptions a little bit better. The other interesting thing in that field, same field that's got some of our toughest soils on it, the strip that we did in that field at 60,000 yielded 4 bushel the acre above the field average. So again, telling me even though it's a rougher, tougher field, I was still higher than I needed to be in that particular field, that it's got room for improvement. That's kind of what I just mentioned there. Kind of the other takeaway, I'm not going much below 80 on our population prescriptions for 19. What I'm doing is moving more of the 100 and 120s down to 90 and 100. Instead of doing 20,000 jumps, I'm kind of narrowing it in and doing 10,000. Some of the other trials that we did along with population, tried to do 2 different sulfur trials. Our standards, the 5 gallons per acre of ATS with our weed and feed. We had one field that was going to go corn after corn, so we'd put down 40 pounds of AMS in the fall. When we decided we were switching to beans, we went out and put another 60 pounds in along with some additional P and K adjustments for beans. and then did no ATS in that field. And then we had another one that we decided we were going to try 80 pounds AMS on a block of the field and do no, it didn't have anything in the fall, but we did no ATS. We just did the dry AMS in the spring. Unfortunately, the last one, due to other issues with planting and harvesting, wound up losing that trial due to some mechanical issues. Also did a tillage trial where rather than just disking, we went in, we've got an case 870, and did about a 140-foot pass at an angle out through a field just to do a trial to see if doing some additional tillage ahead of the beans would pick up how it would respond to that. And that was a trial we also did on our corn. Only on the corn side, we skipped the section where we didn't rip, where we normally would have. We left some blocks that we didn't rip on some of the corn trials we did. Then also, when we had our fall blends put down, our base blend for most of the ground, we had 125 pounds of MAP, 190 pounds of potash. We had them basically run that blend at 125% rate and a 75% rate to see, do we need that much fertilizer or do we need more? How does the yield respond to those scenarios? We also did a block trial of Olivo in the middle of a field where we planted the soybean variety, cleaned out the planter, put Olivo in, planted it out, vacuumed out what little was left, and then went back to that same variety for the rest of the field. And then we did a growth regulator trial at R1 timing. We did another multi-product R1 trial, Reinforced K and NutriSync were the product names that we put in at that R1 on a trial. Then we also, at R3, this was the product combination that was done on the majority of our acres, but because we had the one field where we just did about 13 acres of it, kind of considered that a trial as well. Then we had what we kind of referred to as our kitchen sink, where we took all of those products and put them together in one round. We did that combination in the field in the middle of the Olivo block and then in another field as well. And this is kind of looking at some of the data. This is the Olivo trial where we had it in there using field view on the side, picking out the passes to do the data comparison. So rather than comparing the Olivo against the whole rest of the field, we'd compare it against the strips, the next two rounds immediately adjacent to it, to try and take out some of the variability that might be happening somewhere else in the field. So this is the fun Excel spreadsheet off of this. You can see, and then it shows similar to the populations, there just aren't as many different categories. This year for us, we had zero advantage to the Olivo. Was not real surprising to me. We're lucky enough that we don't have much SDS pressure in our area. It's typically 5 to 10 foot diameter patches here and there, maybe one or two a field. So I wanted to try it to make sure we weren't missing something, but not a big surprise. The kitchen sink combinations with the Olivo and without are the two that are highlighted in blue. So in the one field, when we put it in with the Olivo, we picked up 2 bushel the acre. Another field where we did it without the Olivo, we lost a bushel the acre. However, we're retrying this combination again because where we lost it, I got a little frustrated with our sprayer operation. By the time we got done with the end of the year, between our post-emergent herbicide, this application, and our fungicide, the center pass of the trial had 6 different sets of tire tracks completely gone out, so we were missing 6 rows of the 31, 6 of the 31 rows of beans were completely gone because they were not able to repeat the AB line when they were in the sprayer, so we had a lot of missing beans that I think contributed somewhat to what we saw on that number. Then the next field's the Radiate trial. We picked up 3 bushel on it, and we've run that trial before and pretty consistently see that. So next year we're moving to that's going in with our post-emerge application on all of our acres. Next field will end up with no trials in it. Then our 40 pounds fall AMS plus adding 60 in the spring gained us about 1.9 bushel. But looking at things overall, that field was still right in the middle of the mix of the farm average. So the 5 pounds ATS is a lot, or 5 gallons of ATS for us is a lot more convenient to do on a farm scale basis. So at this point, we're just going to stick with what we've been doing there. Then the next one's got our plus and minus 25% on fall fertilizer. We gain 1 bushel by going up 25%. We gain 3 by going down 25%. So that was kind of a wash on that one, which we've run that now for about 3 years on corn and beans both, and that's typically what we see. So after 3 years of that kind of notice, all of our dry applications last fall were cut by 20%. After 3 years of repeatedly seeing we were putting on more than we needed for our soils, we brought them down. And then that last column is the field where we just did the 1 round with our R3 pass. Line to line on that one, we picked up 6 bushel the acre. Changes we're making for 2019, the planter's been stripped and rebuilt as a 24-row 20-inch with tram lines in it, because we're to the point now where we're making at least 2 post passes through all the beans. Rather than running over multiple sets, I'm giving them tram lines to run them like it's corn with the 120-foot boom. Like I said earlier, we're putting radiate in at R1. We're doing the Validate Tombstone Treva Pro at R3 on all acres. We reduced our dry rates. My prescriptions are all written at this point for next year's seeding, and my average for this year, or for 19, is going to be 87.6 based on the prescriptions. And most of that just comes from moving those 100 and 120s down to 90 and 100. The other trials, we're going to rerun the Reinforce and NutriSync. Hydrohume is a product we've run some in corn. We're going to try it in beans as well. I'm going to continue to do population trials, especially now that we've shifted to 20-inch from 15. I kind of want to reevaluate and make sure that doesn't change things too much on what we need to be doing. We are going to do at least on 13 acres, which for us on basically a half-mile field, 100 or 240 foot wide gets us about 13 acres. It's going to be a 5-pass foliar product based off of a program that Brandt pushes for their high-yield soybean guys in Illinois. We're going to do something very similar to that. We're also going to do a couple of different strips, similar size, where we're going to go in at R5 with the second fungicide insecticide application late season to see what we can pick up there. And then there's question marks. I'm still looking at a couple other things that we're looking at throwing out there as well. I like to try and do, when it comes to beans, every field typically gets something tried in it. And kind of my approach is, does something work? You don't know if you don't try it. I think that kind of fits with some of what Eric was talking about too. And sometimes some of this stuff we could coordinate a little bit with neighbors, try some things and talk about, okay, this didn't work at all for me, and we know we're similar enough in how we do things that we'll look at trying something else instead of all of us trying the same thing over and over. So, but that's kind of what we play around with, or I should say I play around with on beans. We do a little bit of stuff on corn, but I focus more on beans, trying to see what we can do there. And I'm hoping 18 wasn't a fluke for what we saw out of beans. We farm-wide average was 15 bushel an acre above anything we've ever done in the past. It was enough better, it raised our 5-year rolling average by 3.5 bushel the acre. So some of the stuff's paying off, and then by lowering the seeding rates down and not seeing yield losses, it's bringing the ROI up, basically making things more efficient from that standpoint. So, any questions? I talk fast.
All right. Well, that's a lot of information. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Anybody have any questions? No? All right. What we're going to move into is Nikki, our extension office, has to give quick name, part credit. That'll take 20 minutes or so.
You know, this is kind of how the complaints have tended to go with OSHA or the Indiana Office of State Chemists. Unfortunately, we've had some ever-increasing numbers, and it started with some of this. So what happened in 17 and 18? So you can kind of see the numbers up there. I'm definitely one that I'm not going to read every slide to you because that just induces the PowerPoint-induced coma that we like to talk about occasionally. But you can definitely see in here. 17, we started noticing issues, which is why in 18, many of you said, oh yeah, I've got to come to a dicamba training offered by Purdue Extension in order to apply dicamba. Well, you can obviously see between 17 and 18, it stayed about the same as the numbers of complaints that came up. Oh, there we go. I better drop my voice too now. But it stayed about the same. I don't want to shout if you don't have to. That's usually reserved for when one of my kids do something silly. So this is what we're seeing also. You can also see that, the complaints came in. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is the fact that, we see total drift, and then total drift may be associated with dicamba. Yeah, we've had dicamba for years, but the problem is sometimes this volatility is starting to be realized more or less, and that's other things I'm going to show to you as we kind of go through these. So these were kind of the ones that they had the most issues with in this past year on herbicide drift for farmers. There were a few drift issues around nurseries. There are some in this area too that you do need to be aware of, but you can see some of the major complaints some of the complaints also came from things like damage on tomatoes and a hoop house. So this isn't commercial grown tomatoes. This was, I'm saying commercial, not like red gold tomatoes or the, processed tomatoes. These were fresh market tomatoes that they were having issues with. Landscapes and things like that. They're still trying to kind of track and see all these problems, as you'll see. So these are some of the 18 label changes that they had included, which is why you had to come to some of these trainings in 18, including that dicamba-specific training and the detailed recording requirements that you had to have. And that's what I want you guys to pay attention to right now, is the fact that there was supposed to be detailed recording requirements of things that you had to make sure you met when you applied the products. Also that application downwind sensitivity, you had to watch out for that, and things were basically clarified on it. So why do we kind of point it out? This is kind of the numbers of where it was. Evidence of off-target movement, yeah, there was a lot. But sometimes they didn't document that they could say, yes, there was 100% violation, so no documented actually violation, because the problem is that on some of this was the fact that the drift is the key, document drift management violation only. That's the one, and getting to be the ones where basically that might have been, were the wind speeds right? Did you check everything before you went out? Those were the ones that basically beefed up. Because as you're going to see as we go through these slides, we can confirm if you did what you were supposed to do. They can't always confirm that was it dicamba that caused herbicide drift injury. So again, you kind of see, comparison of investigations on applicators. Some of those numbers say the same on the target crop. It's kind of been the same, at least for 17 and 18, even though we have provided the additional education. But again, here's where I'm coming back to. The off-target exposure. Could they say it was particle drift? Well, they could. 23, or this one at least got better, 13% of the time they could say it was because of the particles actually drifting, meaning they could see the full evidence that it was drift. Application during an aversion, that's how many times they could prove it happened. 0. From volatile, I can't say that word, but yeah, when it goes airborne, how many they could prove. Undeterminable, again, that gets back to the saying, they can't always determine when it happens. So these are times when it goes back to, well, they can't 100% say you did the drifting because they can't always 100% determine what did the damage on those other fields. But here was the problem that they started also seeing, is the fact that they asked for those buffer strips. And this is what it looked like sometimes, which was not what was asked for on the label. So this is when they can prove there's a violation, is that if you have the two right next to each other, then yeah, we can definitely tell there was a violation, and that's when they usually would have taken more action. So again, to kind of, why is that important? Again, drift is misuse if it can be proven. So we can't always prove you drifted. Application of intervention, again, it can be misuse if proven. So it is, you're innocent until proven guilty. Violation, again, only if it can be proven. So again, violative cases, you see the number, but again, like I said, you see that it's, okay, wind blowing towards adjacent sensitive crops. That was on the label. That wasn't, we found it there, but it was a label violation. That if they can prove that you violated the label, that's where it came from, that they could say, yeah, it was misuse because you didn't follow the label, that you had to have that. So like I said, that's what to keep in mind. So how has it changed? How it has changed is if you notice that, Bonner said, hey, I want to make sure we have the dicamba talk. The dicamba talk is no longer Indiana Purdue Extension. We aren't hosting it. The companies themselves have to give you that training. Things in Indiana or kind of, nationally. Nationally, it's being handled a little differently in different states. But everyone handling dicamba this year must be a certified applicator. What does that mean? That means, registered technicians, RTs, they can't handle it. If you have a 1A, the commercial, or if you have a private, you can. Under the commercial license, there's that little rule that you can have actually somebody who's not even an RT work on the same property. But again, that doesn't apply to that person on this. If you are working with dicamba, you have to be the applicator, the commercial applicator, or you have to be the private applicator yourself. You cannot hand it off to someone else. The annual dicamba training is required. But again, extension, we are not offering this. You have to get it from the companies. Again, staying this afternoon will get you that credit. If you know someone else who needs it, there are other programs being offered that you can get it from them, or you can contact the companies and say that, or contact me, and I will try to help you get a listing of that so that you have that information. They have limited. Now, keep in mind, remember, when I say they, it's not Indiana. These are label theys. They say R1 flowering or 45 days. That's the length of time you have that you can apply it. So they have shortened your chance or your application window. You also have to make sure your applications are from after 1 hour past sunrise and 2 hours before sunset. Remember where I said the times they can prove it? This is where we're coming back at it again. If you do an application 30 minutes after sunrise, we can prove violation. So that's, again, why you need to remember some of these, and also that, flowering time. They did change the managed areas so that now, before last year we kept saying, no, a right-of-way doesn't count. A right-of-way is a sensitive area. Now you can count it. So don't worry about that rule anymore. You need your records generated within 72 hours of doing an application. Watch your tank mix pHs. And again, watch for, now granted, this says watch for the endangered species protection, but you also notice only 2 counties are listed in that, and I thought it was funny because I think I heard one of the counties saying, what endangered species did we have? Because it was like some random thing they weren't thinking about being an endangered species. So we don't have to worry about this typically in northern Indiana. These are more central southern Indiana counties. Here is the website where updates are always going to be regularly posted. So if you're saying, I don't know, how do I find it? I like to just type in the OISC updates. And you can find, although it's blurry on here because it wasn't a good screenshot, number 1 says dicamba frequently asked questions, but information about dicamba will be there. Or you can call me at the Porter County Extension Office. I apologize, I still don't have business cards yet. Purdue is going through a new branding process, which means therefore getting some things handed out to us, like our new business card formats, has been a little bit of a challenge. I'll hopefully have them soon. But you can always call me. My office phone number, I'll give it to you right now. I'll give you a second if you want. It's 219-465-3555. It's the same as what it's been for years. It's just now you'd ask for me there. I do have an email address as well that you can follow up with me on. It's my first name, Nikki, but apparently my parents had to spell it odd. It's Nikky, not an I, so I'm in a Y. If you get an I, last I knew it was like Nikki Hong, someone else, so they're not going to understand. So Nikky, but then at Purdue, like the university, not the chicken, .edu. So you can either email me or call my office and we'll talk about it some more. So again, like I said, the compliance strategy this year, they're going to monitor and increase some of these monitorings. For complaints when they come in, they're going to have some documentation, but the state chemist also says that, they want to back off on going on as many visits because we feel, or I guess this we is more Indiana, has felt that, as the state chemist office as a whole, felt that we've had too much time and effort put into dicamba and following these complaints. So they're going to try to back off, and only when they need to come out will they come out at that time. But they will utilize certification, suspension, and revocation if there are violators of it. So keep that in mind. So if they find too much of a violation, here is basically their policy, is that basically, they're going to revoke your license for 5 years, which means you can't apply for 5 years. After that 5-year time frame, then you can come back. So they are serious about it, but they're not going to come out on a whim every time they think it happens. There are going to be certain parameters of when they will try to come out instead of basically every complaint they got, because they felt like all they did is chase dicamba this year. So they're going to try to have some different strategies on how to handle the complaints on that. So again, what I emphasize hopefully to you is this was one of the quick guides that we started having last year, but emphasis, please, 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 please follow those steps, document those steps. If you have questions on them, talk to those companies or talk to me so that you're following it correctly. Some of this is timing, the temperature, the volumes, and things like that. Checking drift watch, where where sensitive crops are not. All I can encourage you to do is make sure you're taking the steps you can take to doing it right so that we don't have problems. And also remember, zero wind is a problem. They do want a little bit of wind, just not much. I want to say 3 miles per hour, but don't completely quote me on that, because I want to say it also went up or down. I don't know. But 0 mile per hour wind is not a good thing on this. Keep that in mind, because if there is 0 mile per hour wind, that's when an inversion is likely. So that was also a change. So again, like I said, please get your record sheets, make sure you write them down and fill them out as soon as you can. However you're going to record it, you can talk to the company later and say, hey, how's the best way to record it? But make sure you have that recorded. Oh, I thought I took these slides out. All right. Any questions on that? Okay, so the other thing that I'm going to move on to I'm sorry, yes.
How do you know the pH of the solution?
You could get test strips. How do I know the pH of the solution? Sorry, I forgot. That was the number one thing for me to always repeat a question. How do you know the pH of the solution? You can buy test strips. If nothing else, go to your local pool supply company, and they have dipsticks. So that can be pretty easy. Yes, sir.
I've got the Monsanto Extend spray guideline, gives the winds and everything. And I've also got Spray Smart. Can't remember which one right now, but we have a windsock. Mm-hmm. On many, many occasions, Spray Smart or the other one said it's okay to spray by wind direction when my windsock said just the opposite. And so you can't think you have to report what this says, because that's what they're going to look at. But my windsock did not agree with this by sometimes 180 So I don't know whether they're not keeping up or whether it's in any given area, but windsops don't mind when these things come up.
Yeah. So basically it was, and I'm sorry, what did you call that one program?
One of them is Roundup Ready Extend Spray Pro.
Okay, so he has a program that tries to tell you wind directions, wind speeds versus a wind sock. And sometimes it can be different. And I understand that completely. I don't have the best answer for that. I'd ask the gentleman, how he would handle it. And I forget, Bonner, which company do you have this afternoon? Is it Bayer? Okay. Ask him that question on how they would have you handle that discrepancy, because obviously any program isn't going to be spot on right where you're at. And I thought I had heard that you need to test it on site. But if it was their program and they want you to go by their program, then that's their liability.
I'm sure that the state chemist is going to look at some record to see where they felt the weight was coming from. And I'm saying that whatever that record is may or may not reflect what
Yeah, and I don't know how that'll be handled, but I can try to look into that and find that answer out, how that'll be handled. All right, so hopefully just as equally as rapid getting through it. So the other thing that I was going to talk to you about today, I'm sorry.
Yeah, maybe you said it already, but do we need training if it's a pre-planning application?
If you are using those dicamba products, you have to have the training, regardless.
If there's no trees on no leaves,
It's basically like how you have to have the chemical license if you're using it at all. And again, that's not us. That's the label requirement. That's not us. That's the label. If you use it at all, doesn't matter where you're using it. If you go to use those certain dicamba products, regardless, it's kind of like how you should have to have your license to buy the product right now. They're not going to check to see you did the training. That's on your honor, but you have to have that training if you're going to use that dicamba product. And like I said, yeah, that's not our requirement anymore. That's their requirement. All right. I guess any others? I'm sorry. I may have looked up too fast or down too fast. Okay. So the other thing that I just wanted to make a mention of, and like I said, I will try to be fast because I know we got one more, I believe, short presentation is, so when we start looking at our chemicals now, you see our bottles are going to range in different sizes and different things. We used to start off a lot more with these, you might use, and I may be going back, but we used to use more like gallons and cups and pints per acre now, or we used to measure also by the pounds of how we put our products out on the field. And again, we used to measure by the gallon. But you are starting to obviously probably see more and more. We're starting to measure now by the ounce. But this is where I wanted to make sure that there is an awareness level on, because I gave this talk once already and people didn't have that awareness level, is by the ounce. What ounce? Are we talking a liquid ounce or a dry ounce? But either way, we're talking ounces. So one thing to remember is obviously we need to be a lot more precise on how we're measuring whatever we're putting down. So you've got to be measured. So remember, there's a liquid ounce. We can measure it in a cup. There's such a thing as a liquid ounce, and you will see those on certain labels. I'm sorry, let's skip that. But you'll see that, and you will actually see on that, therefore, on some of these, FL ounce, fluid ounce. Okay, so we do have some containers that measure the fluid ounces. But what's this one? It doesn't say. We make an assumption, obviously, it's a fluid ounce because it's in a measuring cup. But I also love what you see down here. Measurements are approximate. So this is the other thing that you have to be aware of whenever you're using any of these containers. What is your guaranteed performance? Right here, lots of measuring cups. There is a plus or minus 5% chance of error from these products. So you need to be aware of that when you're measuring them onto what it is. So maybe a good thought is to get a really good graduated cylinder, that middle one, and I can use that one to test the two containers on either side to see what their accuracy rating really is. Because mass-produced things may not be accurate, and that's the manufacturer covering their bottom on that. You also see how these are printed, and well, we don't have good marks. Maybe we made some of our own marks in the middle of those. How confident are you on those marks, though, is the question. Look at this one. It's starting to rub off, and look at the approximate ones. I don't have really good ratings when we're starting to get down to some good ounces, and also, well, which one for sure is the ounces? So make sure you're aware. Also be aware, obviously, when they're getting older, can you even read the U.S. fluid ounces that is on the left side? On this one, obviously, we can't read it very well anymore, so it's probably time for a new cylinder to measure it in. So we can see that 8 ounces. So we have to make sure our measuring device is accurate. You notice many of these products come with a container. You can see it, or you can see the fluid ounce ones. Well, that's all well and good. So keep in mind, here is 3 ounces of table salt measured by volume. Here's 3 ounces of table salt measured by weight. So we can use those containers, and that's a volumetric measurement, meaning it's not the actual weight. We're measuring the volume of it, and it's different. Why? Well, you look, we're going to have different ones, different weights. And here's one of a fluid ounce compared to some of these, and none of those marks are on the same size. To bring a point home again, this was an article, a Christmas miracle, that a baby was born weighing no less than the weight of a soda can. Because again, they're messing up those ounce ratings. You have to keep in mind that dry ounces and liquid ounces are different, and we're trying to basically measure a dry ounce by volume, but is volume how we should measure dry? Not necessarily, because what weighs more, a pound of feathers or a pound of lead? It's the same. The bigger question is which do you want to store, a pound of lead, or a ton of lead or a ton of feathers? But they're the same, and that's the point we're getting to now about volume. By weight, all of these things are 3 ounces, but due to their textures, it's going to vary. So we can't say that if I have product A here, I can use it on product B here, even if it's from the same company, because if one thing changed, that weight might have changed in that product, so that now the volumetric measurement is off. You could easily put too much or too little down. You've seen products probably look like this. On the top of the bag, what do they look like on the bottom of the bag? Is that the same weight? No, so you crush it and it's going to give you a different weight. So you can clearly see here on different tubes. Yeah, some of the volumes of these are different, but you see that is all over the board depending upon what those particle sizes are. And again, what part of the bag are you measuring it out of? We're trying to cheat and make it simple, but are we doing the best things for us by doing that? And again, volumetric accuracy, plus or minus 7.5%. Weighing required for more precise measurement. I love that one. So third conclusion is, if we want to be right, we've got to make sure we use the container that comes with that product. But to take it one step further, you're still going to want to dry measure it if you can. Because again, that one's accurate to that amount. Here's plus or minus 10% accuracy. So that means if you were supposed to put, I'll say, and I'm going to just make up a number, if you're supposed to put 100 ounces down, what are you actually putting down? Anywhere from 90 to 110 ounces. Is that going to make a big difference? Yeah, when you start talking, is it 10 versus 9 or 11, you're starting to get a bigger difference in how that product is going to work, or what effects you may have, or if you start running into problems. Here's another good one, plus or minus 15% accuracy. Plus or minus 20% accuracy. I bet on some of these, it's on those larger products. It's just like I could squish a lot of feathers or break down feathers, and I could squish them into a very small opening. And that's where this volumetric measurement comes into being a problem, because we're, again, trying to measure something that is actually supposed to have weight rather than size to it. So again, keep that in mind. How do we be for sure? We get a scale out. That's what they did here. This is it on a scale. It's 1 ounce. Here we look on the chart. It is obviously off by probably that 10%. And that doesn't look broke down. It's just off. The measurement itself is off, or the measuring device itself is off, because that product does not look broken up. So again, it can be off just due to it being off because it's mass produced, and it could be off due to the particles themselves being broken down. So again, if you are wanting the best accuracy so that you get your money's worth out of it, but you don't also throw money out the window, the best thing that you can do is get a scale and measure it. At least check it every so often. You know, you could go so far as to check it every day that you spray or do something, but at least check it occasionally, or if you know you're getting down to the bottom of the bag, you probably want to weigh it rather than actually put it in one of these volumetric measuring devices if you want to make sure that you're still getting your full bang at the end of that container. Questions? All right. Then I am good. And I will be around, like I said. If you need any of the credits, like I said, as soon as our next speaker is done, you can come see me, and we can take care of it.
You advancing the slides. I'll just put it. We got it. Yeah. I don't want to stand here. I'll pass it. We'll pass it.
Oh, I'm watching.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so I'm Paul, brother Jeff. I've already had one person tell me, hurry up because lunch is coming. We're going to actually talk about soybeans. Ryan already talked about them. We didn't know he was going to talk about soybeans. If thinking about soybeans in 2019, with $9 beans, it's a challenge. And so thinking about how we can be profitable with soybeans in 2019. Jeff texted somebody in this room yesterday and said we were going to be talking about soybeans, and this is the emoji that they sent back to him, Wapple. So you may feel this way about soybeans. I don't know. And corn is much more predictable. And I'm reading a book about teenagers because I need a lot of help. And the title of the book is called Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. And I feel that way about soybeans. And you may have had the same experience as us. A couple years ago, we were like going to high manage some a soybean field underwater. And we threw everything we could at it. Our field across the street, 40 acres across the street, just let it go. That field was like 10 or 12 bushels better, and you're just like, whatever. You know, it's just that, and that's how it feels sometimes with soybeans. So we're going to talk a little bit about being profitable with soybeans. We thought this meme was funny. When I die, I want the USDA to lower my coffin so they can let me down just one last time.
So yeah, that's just on, you know, with soybeans, with prices being where they're at today, you know, I think no one knows if they're going to go up, if they're going down, if Trump's going to make a deal. You know, it's just, there's a lot of unknowns in soybeans. And so, you know, as we look at 19 and how are we going to remain profitable, there we go. So we weren't as dry as Wapple was, so we had some timely rains. We were dry in July, and we didn't know what we were going to find when we get out to the soybean field. We get out there and we were finding some really cool stuff. You know, the monitor hitting 100 bushels sometimes, and it was really exciting. And then as the year progressed, you know, it was our early start to harvest really ever. And we were really excited to get it going, and then the rain came, and then the snow came. I don't know if you guys were out in the snow. And then the concaves were blocked. We couldn't get soybeans through the rotor. We had wheels falling off.
My wife said, this is the first time now I understand why you guys have to just go at harvest, why you can't take a break, because you get into this. It was like, finally my wife understands me. It took 20 years.
And then our last day of harvest, the rotor PTO shaft blew up and went through the oil pan. Yeah. So that was, we ended harvest with a bang. Literally. So yeah, as we look into how to raise soybeans, back to our original question, in 19 and remain profitable, which is really, really hard. And so we're sitting down and we're looking at ways, how can we do that? And so, you know, one is raise prices, which is really hard to do, raise yield levels, and then try and find ways to reduce costs. So,
yeah, we did find this product that we actually are going to sell, and the product on the left is been the bean on the left has been treated with this product. The bean on the right was just a test, and it's actually called Weasel P 1000, and so we have some in our truck. I'm kidding, right? So if you read magazines, it just seems like if we did everything they said, we'd be raising like 190 bushel beans. But it's like, man, what is actually going to make us money and what isn't? And so just trying to sort that out is really a challenge. Since we've tried a lot of Weasel Pea and I don't know what it was, but we tried a lot of stuff. But it's like, what's actually going to make us some money?
So yeah, in this field, I mean, these beans are in the same row, and they're treated the exact same. And you have one that is flourishing and one that's not. So that's the frustrating that we find with soybeans. And then you get these advertisements saying, well, look what we treated and look what we didn't. And there's just a lot of false stuff out there on what's really working. And so what determines a soybean yield? So you look at your nodes per plant, your beans per pod, and then your seed size. And so those are the things that are driving your yield. And so as I'm looking at the field, I'm looking at my nodes. I'm counting nodes. And so that's the branches coming off your stem. And so I'm trying to get 19 to 20 nodes at the end of the year to have as much yield potential as I can, which is really hard to do. And so, that's one thing that I'm scouting is I'm looking at nodes. If I know how to do this. And so a few things that we want to identify to raise soybean yields that we're going to talk through. Early planting, variety, planting populations, proper nutrients, we were out there April 15th planting. Last year we weren't able to be out as early, but I think we started the 20th, 21st. And the past 2 years, those have been our best yield fields, the ones that have started early. The conditions weren't amazing either. It wasn't the perfect, we're out there planting and Paul's saying, we need to stop.
Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad.
This looks terrible. And I'm like, we need to just try it. Why not try it on your farm? And so we tried it the past 2, and those have been our best yields. And so here's from last year. This was a later field that we had. On the right, it's planted on 524. We got rained out. We came back on 529, and you could see that red. Red is usually never good on your yield monitor, but it was a 10 bushel difference just in 5 days. And so just how important it is to get that plant out early. Yes.
Back that up one. Okay, is that a 30 or is that a 15?
That's 15s, 15 inch.
Okay, so don't you have any trouble keeping the gauge wheels away from themselves?
You can. Yeah, you got to drive nice and straight.
If you can get your auto switch set up, you can get between where you don't run over them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it fits in there, but it's tight.
Another one would be variety selection, and we didn't say company selection because they are giving us food after this, so I've got to say Wyckoff hybrids, stay with them. But variety selection is one of the biggest factors, but one point we wanted to make is that we've got a 2-4 bean in this field. Some of our best beans were actually in this field, and the 2-4 bean on the left, and there was a 3-5. But if you look up in the corner, the corner suffered a ton more with the 2-4 bean, and that's just the timing of the rains happened where it could have been just the opposite, but the timings of the rain. So my point is spreading out your risk by having different maturing bean varieties is a good thing. I think this field averaged 79, but with a lot of 50 bushels in the corners and that border, that seed border down there is not too good.
So plant population, and so that was really interesting. Is it Brian? Just talking about different studies on plant population, how far we can push it down, which that's really exciting. We're trying to negate white mold and disease pressure, and so as we're decreasing plant population, so for us we're determining on time of year. So our early stuff we're planting a little higher population. Our soil type on sandier soil, we're raising that population to the 130s, 140s. On our irrigated, we're in the low hundreds, 110. But we like the variable of the planting population and saving money in that aspect, and also producing the same amount of yield. Nutrients. So what nutrients are we looking for as soybeans? As more and more data comes out, even from universities, they're pushing sulfur, and we've been doing that for several years. So we enjoy sulfur, potassium, as potassium is giving you weight in your seed, and so potassium is really important. Calcium, and it is transporting nutrients through your plant. Boron, zinc, leaf size, manganese, as many of you guys know. And then we also like moly as far as helping with root nodulation, and that's really important on root nodulation. So some things that we do, just on every acre of our soybeans, we're putting out a sulfur product in the spring, either an AMS or a K-Mag or sulfate of potash, some sort of sulfur product, putting some Pel-Lime out there to get it early available calcium, and then adding some humates with it to help stabilize and add carbon to our soil. And then with our herbicide spray, we're adding micronutrient package with it, and as Wapple said, some auxiliary fertilizers, some sugars and some humates, and then a second foliar feeding of nutrients, whether it is we're experimenting with potassium, like potassium acetate, and other things that we can try and drive that plant. So we're looking at tissue samples through the season and seeing, does this plant need more to, really finish that crop out? And is it going to be short of nutrients? And then on the seed treatment side, we like biologicals. There's some really cool products now that are really replacing your talc product or your graphite, which we're already putting in the box, but we can get it, in a biological too, and it not cost that much more money. And so that's kind of a no-brainer for us, is just, instead of throwing graphite in, throwing a better product out there while you're still doing that thing. And then Molly. So we're treating our seed with Molly. So as we're looking at beans, we're looking at node spacing, and we're trying to keep at least 3 fingers with your spacing. But there's times where we're getting 4 or 5, and the plant's getting really lengthy, and we're saying, how can we shorten those nodes? And so some guys have alluded to a PGR. We're trying to change the growth hormone in that plant to regulate it on how much it's growing. And that stuff gets really, really tricky. You don't want to mess up the plant, and screw it up, but you want to help it. And so I'm not really that smart to know when to put that stuff on and if it's working or not. But one thing we've noticed is, so we had this no-till field. We didn't touch any of the stalks. And the ends, we messed them up. It was a little wet at harvest, and we had to rip the ends to try and take out some compaction. And then we vertical tilled in the spring. And so what we noticed was that end grew faster. It was nice and lush, and it grew taller. And so I took the plants from the end, from that spring vertical till pass to the no-till spot out in the field. And the one on the left was 3 inches taller, and so it looked beautiful, right? It looked awesome. But the one on the left, or the one on the right, it had 9 nodes, and the vertical till had 8 nodes. And so it was putting more in growth rather into nodes. And so that's why sometimes we look at beans and say, oh man, they look amazing, and then we go out and harvest and it's 50 bushel. Well, it was putting too much into growth and not, reproduction. And so that's one thing that excites us, is we can save money with no-till and have the same yields, or if not better. And so, just University of Illinois study, tractor hours. What's it costing you to run that tractor through the field? And so a 255 horsepower tractor, they're saying costs you $90 an hour to run. And I don't know if it's that high, but it's a lot of money. And in the spring, I don't know about you guys, but we're trying to get a lot of things done. And if that's one less thing you guys can do, you could put your resources someplace else.
Okay, so one thing that we've been doing for the last several years is a lot of cover crops. And so it's like, what are some of the values of cover crops? And it just seems like a really trendy thing. It's like every farm magazine you open talks about soil health. And so it's like, what are we even talking about when we talk about making our soils healthier? So one thing that we're trying to do through cover crops is just to have healthier soil. So when I think of healthy soil, I just think of the difference between soil that is dead and soil that is alive, or the microbiology in the soil being alive or dead. And we can do things to make it more alive, or we can make it more dead. And there's a lot of factors that go into it, but it's remembering that we're solar farmers. What we're trying to do is capture the sun. And so obviously what we do as we grow a commodity is we capture the sun. But what about the times of year when there's nothing out there? So if we think about it, plants build soil, and the sun grows plants. So the sun is what builds our soil. So this is something that we've kind of adopted, is the idea that what if we could keep something growing out there all year long? And so cover crop.
Yeah, so as we look at soil, when I see a bare soil now, what I see is it's naked, it's hungry, it's thirsty, and it's running a fever. And so we're trying to regulate temperature, we're trying to regulate evaporation, and keep that moisture in the soil where it belongs, and then keeping an even temperature in that soil where it's not fluctuating from 90 degrees during the day and then 60 degrees at night. because your biology doesn't like all that variation in it. And so we're just trying to keep it a more even, steadfast. So benefits of cover crop, just some things we wrote down that we are seeing on our farm. Wind erosion, better water infiltration, nutrient sequestering, so making nutrients in the soil. Soil health, weed suppression, disease suppression, roots doing the tillage for us and not running a piece of iron through it, increasing biological activity, and increasing organic matter. And so as we look at a wind erosion, you know, we have these spring events where the wind picks up and we look out the front door and this is what we see. And so if we laid a piece of paper over an acre, that is 1 ton of soil. And so, you know, that's not a lot of soil, but that's 1 ton of soil that's leaving your field. A guy was driving through and he saw this soil piled up in the corner of the field in the snow in the fence row, and he called it snert. And so he took this soil and he did a soil test on it, and then he took a test of the field, and what he found was that soil that was blown away had more nutrients, or a little bit more nutrients than the field did. And so the soil that's leaving our field is our best soil. It's not the worst soil.
Water infiltration. So to me, this is a really big deal. What if all the rain that dropped on our farm, we actually were able to infiltrate it into the soil? And you've seen like the USDA do those water infiltration tests where they take the soil. But the one thing that really was an aha for me was it wasn't really that it was a no-till soil. It was that it had residue on the surface. So it had the residue on the surface is what kept the soil from like clogging up and not being able to take anything down. Also, having good, what's the word? Aggregation. Yeah, just having your, tilth, another way to say it. So this picture was right after 1.5 inches rain. So this is a tilled field on one side of the road, and it's just like, that's bad. Because what that represents is as that water leaves the field, there goes our nutrients, our herbicide that we just sprayed on that field. And what happens to that water? Where does it go? It goes into our waterways. That's bad. We need to be self-regulate before we get regulated on what's happening in the Mississippi as farmers. But this is right across the street. So that's one side of the street, same time, this is the other side of the street. So we're looking at just the value of having some residue out there and being infiltrate soil. It's a big deal.
With just weed suppression, you know, it's really helping with mare's tail, the pigweeds. And so this spring we had a 30-foot pass in the field. It was serial ride. The guy ran out, you know, and then he drove back he ran out on the end. So there was a 30-foot strip, half-mile long, that had no rye on it, and then just out in the middle of the field. Well, that strip had mare's tail all in it. And then you get out of that into the cereal rye, and there wasn't any mare's tail anywhere. And so we're really seeing some really cool benefits just from the weed suppression. And then looking at our soil as, you know, we have that biological activity going. Those microbes, those bacteria, the fungi, the protozoa, the earthworms, they're all hungry. And so if you think of it as an elephant, your soil eats the equivalent of 2 large elephants per day. And so we have to be feeding that soil. And so, you know, when our microbes die, when our biologicals die, then they're not sequestering nutrients. They're not releasing nutrients to your plant. And so that means you're going to have to buy more nutrients.
I heard a guy talking like 10 years ago, and he said there's enough nutrients in our soil to last us our lifetime. And I just couldn't figure out, what is he even talking about? Why do I still have to put fertilizer on my field every year? And he's telling me I have plenty there. And it has to do with if there was an alive soil, it would be eating and it would be unlocking nutrients in our soil made available to our plant. So a healthy soil is going to actually unlock nutrients that I don't have to buy. It's a big deal, especially over the long run.
And so how do we feed our soil? Well, we're feeding it with residue, our residue cover, so whatever we're growing, the residue, and then also with roots. You know, our roots are feeding the soil. Organic matter. So this, I drove through Florida, driving past this field. I was like, we got to stop and take a picture of this. So, I mean, this is probably less than 0.5 organic matter. And you think this farmer, you know, he has to put a lot more nutrients on this field than a 3% organic matter field. And he's basically just using the soil to hold his crops up, right? He's just holding it up. And so he needs a lot more water, a lot more nutrients. 1% of organic matter can hold up to 27,000 gallons of water. It holds 80 to 20 times its weight in water and recycled nutrients. And so the question is not can we grow something? We can grow things on Mars. It's how many resources it's going to take and from where. How much more money is it going to cost you? How much more are you going to add on? The more on. More on?
Yeah, that's you. That's you. Just thinking about organic matter, it's like a question to ask ourselves, are we actually losing or gaining organic matter? And you could see how if we have less organic matter, we're worse off. And like he said, I mean, at some point, it's just like hydroponics. I mean, you're just, the soil is holding it up, but it's not supplying anything. You have to give it everything, and that'd be a terrible place to be. So approximately 2/3 of your organic matter increase will come from roots. I thought that was an interesting statistic. So just kind of recapping, here's just some of the things we mentioned is how to raise soybean yields, early planting, variety, spreading out your risk, planting populations, getting those lower, proper nutrients, seed treatment, no-till, cover crop, and then how to reduce cost. No-till would save you tractor savings and fuel savings. Lower seed populations, like Ryan was saying, is a direct cost savings. And then soil health is not something you can do magically, but over time we're going to purchase a lot less nutrients if our soil is alive. So one of the things I saw was recently is like the state of Indiana average yield is 57 bushel. And 57 bushel, if we were in a $12 bean environment, maybe that would be okay, but we're not in that environment. So are we going to be able to make it at 57 times $9? I don't know. That's pretty tight. So what if we could increase our yields from 57 to 67, maybe 67 to 77? All of a sudden, that's the difference between being profitable and not being profitable. So just some of the things we shared is not any magic potions. It's actually very, very free stuff that we found that have helped us. So hopefully that'll help you guys. Any questions? Yeah. I figured no less from you. Anybody else? Yeah.
I would just verify everything that you said about putting cover crops on. We've been doing it for close to 35 years, and the longer we've had cover crops, the less inputs it has taken to produce yield.
Is your organic matter going up or down?
Pardon me?
Have you seen organic matter increase?
We've never really tested for organic.
Okay.
But I'm sure it has. And I'll make one correction on the statement you said. It's not the roots in the soil that's increasing the organic matter. It's the microbes when they feed off the roots and die and decompose. That's what produces the organic matter.
Thank you. I will take that correction. That is correct. Anybody else? Yeah, so we've got some exotics here. Yeah, I mean, we started with cereal rye. Cereal rye is really easy. We like annual rye with its root structure. Oats to help with the mycorrhizal fungi. Some hairy veg for root nodulization to give some nitrogen for the corn crop the next year. Buckwheat, sunflowers, sunhead. One of our biggest challenges with the exotic blends is that we don't have a lot of time up here. So somehow you've got to get them in earlier, or you're probably wasting your money. But like something like cereal rye before beans is pretty easy because you can plant it up until into October. And so, yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
That picture out there, what's your timing on when you spray that cover crop off? What's over at?
Every year we're trying to get it as far as possible. as much growth, because the ingrowth is really where you gain the most benefit from it. And so
Because the biomass just is exponential, you know, if you kill it, you know, as you can. So we're planting green, and then we're.
Yeah, so we've gone to spraying after we plant. So yeah, after we plant the beans, then terminate the cover.
You roll or you spray?
We spray, and we're gonna crimp some this spring to terminate. We're gonna try it.
I don't know.
Don't drive by.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're not telling you where that farm's at. Anybody else? All right.
So Paul and Jeff wanted to come in to a KISS cover band from the ceiling and a smoke machine. But Chris called the insurance company. They're like, yeah, maybe with better permitting next year, we'll try that. But with that said, I thought he was going to do a drop mic on me, so I appreciate you not dropping my mic. That was classy. But yeah, thanks again for everybody coming in. Listen, you know, these young men come in on their own. Like I said, I don't really give them any guidance. I just kind of give them a timeline, and they fill, you know, with the time with what they saw happening on the farms this year. Every year it'll be a little bit different because obviously every year is different. So really appreciate those guys coming in. Obviously this didn't happen last night. They've been working on these. Everybody, Brian's been working on his for, I don't know, since December or something. I think Ziegler called me and said you were already working on it. So yeah, just a lot of time and energy put in, you know, futzing around with it and making sure it's right. You know how these things go. So really appreciate those guys coming in. So at this point, this ends the live feed for Facebook. So I want to appreciate